Georgia's quest for a three-peat is alive and well, with the Dogs sitting atop the latest college football playoff rankings. Brock Bowers is back. All is well in Athens at the moment. There's even talk recently that if they are undefeated going into the SEC title game against Alabama and lose, they'd still get in. Here's a look at the latest installment of the CFP rankings, the third so far this year. Again, Georgia now in the top spot. Ohio State and Michigan in a 2-3 Big Ten battle. And Florida State holds steady at 4 with Washington, Oregon, Texas, and Alabama all right behind them at 5 through 8. So again, we're going to get 12 teams starting next year. But what if we started this year? Take a look at 24/7 Sports compiling how a 12-team playoff would look here at NRG Stadium here. A couple of things to note. Tulane, obviously, group of 5 gets in at 12. You have Oregon and Oregon State there, which would be 2 turf wars in 3 weeks there. But the key here is, based on the latest rankings, the assumption is Ohio State takes care of Michigan and stays at number 2. So the top 4 get a bye. But you see Alabama and Mizzou out of the SEC would get in. And that's where I want to start, because Tom Fornelli's back with us from the Cover 3 podcast here. So before we get your sort of breakdown, hypothetical 12-team bracket, Tom, it's funny because even last year, a 2-loss Alabama team, people were pining for to get into the college football playoff. Under this format, all those 1-loss teams, which includes a Texas, an Oregon, and an Alabama, would all get in.
November, that means it's campaign season, and that is one of the strange things about what we're dealing with the playoff this year in the rankings is that, for 2 straight weeks, the top 8 teams in the rankings have won all their games, and the only top 10 teams to lose lost to teams in the top 8. So it's kind of kept things really chalky, and it's keeping hopes alive for everybody in this 4-team playoff. But again, if this was next season right now, it'd be kind of boring because we would know who the playoff teams were already.
Yeah, there's the whole thing when we get to this, like, oh, if you're not in the top 10 in the first installment of the CFP, you basically have no chance. But now we've expanded it, which is in good ways, in some ways good, in some ways interesting. There, part of what we love college football is because of the arguments surrounding the amount of slots that we have. All right, Tom, let's get through it. So take us through the breakdowns. Again, the top 4 teams in this scenario would get a bye. Who ends up getting through to face the top 4?
Yeah, look at it, starting with that Michigan-Tulane game. Listen, Tulane is a very good team. We saw it get to the Cotton Bowl last year where it beat USC. It's not quite as good this year, and it's nowhere near as good as Michigan. So I feel like this would be a first-round blowout. The Wolverines move on from this one pretty quickly, move them to the next round. Next, we'll look at the Alabama-Missouri matchup. Mizzou is a very good team. I think that there is a solid argument to make that it is the 3rd best team in the SEC ahead of LSU, despite the head-to-head result earlier this year. I just don't think Missouri's a good enough team to beat Alabama. I think in this matchup, the Tide would have a little too much for a Tigers defense that can get a bit leaky at times. I think Alabama moves on in this spot. Next, we get Oregon State. If only there were some way we could see this game played out in the regular season. Oh, why can't we? But no, this is another excellent game. I would love to see this game twice in 3 weeks, especially since Oregon is leaving for the Big Ten. So I don't know when we'd get to see it again in the future. But in this matchup, I think the Ducks right now, honestly, if you were to poll most people, they would be considered the best team in the Pac-12 right now, even after losing to Washington. So I think they would win this game and move on. Next, we get Texas and Louisville. Louisville has been one of the bigger surprises of the year. They are a win against Miami away from clinching a spot in the ACC championship game this weekend, and I think they deserve it. I don't think they'd beat Texas, though. I think the Longhorns are better, even after losing Jonathan Brooks to a torn ACL. I just think they have way too much firepower on offense, so the Longhorns get by here.
Okay, so it's fairly chalk, I think, but still taking a look at what we're used to, which is a national semifinal for the college football playoff. But we get quarterfinals now, so take us through the next round.
Yeah, again, this is the only spot where Michigan is only outside the top 4 because of the conference champions only getting the byes. I think Michigan is a better team than Washington. The Huskies are prolific on offense. They are high-powered, but defensively they are a sieve. I could see Michigan completely controlling the clock here on the ground and just moving the ball at will to get the win. So Michigan moves on to the Final 4. Next, Georgia, Alabama. We're going to see it in Atlanta. We would see it again in this scenario in the playoff here. No complaints from me because these are 2 of the best teams in the country. country, so anytime they could play, I'm all for it. But I do think Georgia is the better overall team, so I think it'd be close, and in a rematch, anything can happen. But I've got Georgia getting a clean sweep over the Tide. Next, Oregon, Florida State. Again, I think Oregon has been one of the best teams in the country for the last month and a half. Florida State has not really been tested since that opening game against LSU. It has been somewhat of an easy slate since. I don't think they'd like what they get from the Ducks. Here's your upset. Oregon knocks Florida State out and moves to the Final Four. And then finally, Ohio State, Texas, the Quinn Ewers Bowl. I think the Buckeyes would win this game. I think the Texas losing Brooks, this is where it would hurt them against a very good Ohio State defense that could kind of take the passing game away from them and force them to beat them on the ground. I don't think they would. The Buckeyes move on.
All right, so then we're down to the Final Four, which has arguably two teams that are ultimate eye test teams in Michigan and Oregon, Tom. But how do you see it there with those two national semifinals?
Yeah, they're very similar teams, but I do give Georgia the edge simply because while Michigan has been able to throw the ball a lot better this season and J.J. McCarthy has taken steps forward, I think Georgia has better weapons at receiver than Michigan does. I think Carson Beck has flown under the radar as a very good quarterback this season who could end up in the Heisman conversation before this year comes to an end. So in this matchup, I just think Georgia gets the edge over the Wolverines. I move them on to the title game, and when they're there, here comes my red-hot Oregon Ducks. Honestly, I don't think Ohio State's offense is quite as good as we thought it would be coming into the season. I know they looked great against Michigan State last week, but Michigan State is not a good football team. Most everybody is putting up 30 to 40 points against them. The problems that they've had all year have not been solved. Meanwhile, Oregon is solid on both sides of the ball and on special teams. The Ducks pull off yet another upset to reach the title game.
So then we get Georgia and Oregon, which would be no short of storylines with Dan Lanning and Bo Nix from the Oregon side going back to the SEC and against Georgia respectively. I'm curious to get your early lean on what that line would be, Tom, and then who do you favor at the end?
I would think that Georgia's probably about a 10 to 13 point favorite in this game, in this matchup, even with as good as Oregon has been. And I think that would play out on the field because I think Georgia, much like we saw last year when these two teams met to open the 2022 season, I think they cruise to a relatively easy win. It's the three-peat. They're the dogs. They've been the best team in the country all year. And we end, even in a 12-team playoff, the best team's going to win in the end, so give me the dogs.
Okay, so Tom thinking that Kirby Smart would get it done. Carson Beck, Kendall Milton, Brock Bowers and company. By the way, Tom, appreciate the double duty. And if you're going to give me 13 points of that national championship game, I'm going to take it right now. Appreciate you, my man.